Monster, directed by Patty Jenkins, starring Charlize Theron and Christina Ricci. It's a biographical character study based on the real-life story of Aileen Wuornos, a prostitute from Daytona Beach, who eventually became a serial killer. In the film, she's played by Charlize Theron in a role she won an Oscar for, and deservedly so. On the one hand, she is physically transformed from the gorgeous lady we all know into this ugly, bloated woman ravaged by life and alcohol and prostitution. It is impressive how unrecognizable she is. On the other hand, even looks aside, she disappears completely into her role. From speech patterns, voice, the manic, paranoid looks she throws around, the laugh, the emotions, it is all there and it is all believable, which the film hinges upon because it attempts to take the story of this evil serial killer and humanize her. And I think it is a very successful attempt. We get to see how initially her killings, especially the first murder, was purely in self-defense when she was fighting for her life, and a lot of awful stuff has already happened to her at that point. And going even deeper than that, hinting at her past, her lacking upbringing as a poor orphan who turns to prostitution at a very early age as this only visible source of income. Then the teenage pregnancy, the child of which was given up for adoption. And so from these events in the life of Aileen, those events kind of cascaded, spiraled down into what this life is the moment we meet her. An aging whore who doesn't really have any glimmer of hope for the future in her life. Until she meets Selby, who she befriends and ultimately becomes a lover of. Selby is a made-up character, and I think it's the only major element of the film which was not taken directly from real life, although a very similar person did exist, just didn't give permission to be portrayed directly on screen. So there was a person like that, just the name is changed and like the specifics of the character are made up. And she becomes a crucial element of Eileen's story because she's this young, naive, innocent lesbian girl who falls for Aileen and is impressed by the older lady's attitude and confidence. And people in the film, and crucially, we as the audience as well, we expect Aileen to only be using Selby for her own gain. Whereas it turns out she really did appreciate her. It was a real human connection and perhaps the one last final chance at finding humanity before Aileen descended down that spiral of crime and violence. There's also a really good sequence in the film early on when she tries to clean up and get a real job, but gets constantly rejected and offered like no help at all, no alternatives, which really shines a light on how difficult it is in the American system to really get a second chance, to try and become an honest, productive member of society. Aileen is not given those chances, even when she asks for them, which suddenly becomes a huge factor in her ultimate fate. And also expanding on this, the film, apart from being this intimate character study of a very specific person, it also becomes a wider critique of how America lets people slip through the cracks, how people like Aileen become those people through a series of misfortunes and lack of guidance in their youth, and how eventually all the roads potentially leading out of their situation are cut off and there really is no alternative. That people, can say, oh, get a job, get yourself cleaned up, but sometimes it literally is impossible. Crucially, even though this critique is quite biting in the movie, it never really tries to completely vindicate Aileen. It's still very clear that whilst the initial steps on her murderous road may be justified in some ways, there was a point that a line was crossed, and she did eventually become the titular monster. So it's quite an impressive movie overall because it's walking the line between humanizing a serial killer and making us understand why she did what she did, but still condemning her in the end, whilst also using this opportunity to show some of the things that are clearly wrong with the American society. And in the center of it, a career-defining performance by Charlize Theron.